What's up, everyone? I'm going to walk you through the philosophical thinking handout that was assigned for Intro to Philosophy. I'm just going to read through it and kind of give some of my comments. What I love about Sophie's World, the first reading assignment before we get into Plato's Republic, is that it introduces us in the form of a story to a new way of thinking, philosophical thinking. Aristotle said philosophy begins in wonder. We are amazed at how the stars shine, how lava flows, how a fetus develops. We are amazed, if we think about it, at why we even exist in the first place. So philosophy may be thought of as wonder. It begins at least in wonder, but it's more than that. Philosophy nowadays refers often to the academic discipline. That's why you're taking philosophy at a college as part of your career, part of your general education. And professional philosophers today write, speak, read, make arguments, and conduct deep analysis of words and concepts. That's the meaning modern academics give it to the word philosophy. So there's lots of different branches of contemporary philosophy, analytic and continental, as well as historical versus contemporary. Lots of different types of philosophy that professional academics care deeply about. We're not going to get into those much in this class because we want to have an encounter with wisdom. Originally and literally, philosophy is the love of wisdom. What does the love of wisdom mean? Let's look to Socrates for an answer. Socrates was the first philosopher and the only philosopher of this type in the world at this time. There were plenty of other wisdom traditions, people pursuing wisdom, but the difference between Socrates is that he never claimed to be wise. In fact, he claimed that the love of wisdom was the search for wisdom, the love meaning the lack of something. There were those who claimed to have wisdom, but there wasn't in the East or in other parts of Greece a search for wisdom, an admission of ignorance. Socrates defines the love of wisdom in Plato's book, The Symposium, as the lack of wisdom, the poverty. We have to know what we don't know in order to seek wisdom. So think about some different types of love. I have love for my pets. I have love for my family. I have love for my car, love for my favorite ice cream, and so on. But now think about a longing for something that you don't have. We also have a special kind of love, a distinct love for things we don't have. Call it craving, missing someone, right? So someone that you love, you miss them when you're not around. Someone that you don't love, when they're not around, you don't feel anything in particular. Lacking, you notice the lack of food when you're hungry. Loving or longing. 3 examples. Most of us have experienced being homesick when you're away at camp or a relative's house and you love your home. This sense of love is a longing to be back there. Okay, if you've ever been on a long vacation, you can actually miss your bed. You can love being out in the world and seeing things and love the variety. And at the same time, the simple comfort of a familiar bed is like all you can think about sometimes. I come to long for that familiar thing, the bed, in a new, sweet, and almost painful way. This is the kind of love of philosophy. It almost hurts. I long for the comfort and familiar good sleep that I can get only back home. The same goes for maybe your routines, for your favorite people that you see, for your habits. Another example of this particular type of longing, a longing to travel. It's almost the opposite of the longing to be home. Most of us can relate to wanting to go on an adventure, to see something new, maybe to get in the car and go on a road trip, get lost. The first time I went to New York City, I got off the subway and I looked up and there were these skyscrapers. I didn't want to look at my Google Maps. I wanted to be lost. I wanted to explore. I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to find something. I wanted to stumble across something cool. Especially in April, people like to go on pilgrimages to see holy sites, to see national monuments, to see maybe people that you haven't seen for a while. This is sometimes called wanderlust, which is a great term. When we have wanderlust, we don't love to see new places in the way that we love our bed or love the familiar. We may not even know where we want to go. We just long for something new, for variety, for a change of pace, for anything out of the ordinary. As soon as you're old enough, I don't know if you guys have felt this desire. Sometimes you just want to get in the car and drive and disappear off the face of the planet. We'll find out where we're going when we get there. That's the longing to travel. Another example, when you have a crush on someone or when you fall in love, perhaps by accident, with your best friend, someone that you already loved in one way, but you begin to love them in a different way. You begin to long for them in a new, sweet, and almost painful way. You miss them when they're not around, and you're painfully aware that they are not yours because for now, at least, they're just a crush or just a friend, right? So this is that window of time between developing the crush and maybe expressing it or actually getting into a relationship with that person if you're lucky. When you are friends and they love you as a friend, but you love them in a longing way that's not yet reciprocated, maybe never will be. The thing they have in common is that these three examples illustrate a kind of love for things we don't have. That is the way that philosophers long for wisdom. Philosophy is the love for wisdom, not because we have it, but because we don't have it, and we're seeking it. The philosophical quest may be in some ways more like a homecoming, or more like an adventure, or more like falling in love. But it is certainly connected to the search for belonging and union with the beloved. Active search. In this way, love of wisdom involves the active search for that which you love. When we long to see new places, we pack the car, we buy the plane ticket, we go. When you long to make your move on somebody, you get courageous and you shoot your shot. When we long to go home, we make plans to get back. It takes the form of action. It's not an idle wishing, a way of life. Likewise, philosophy is not to be compared with mere curiosity. We all sometimes idly pursue knowledge. We all Google things that we're curious about or ask somebody or pick up a book. Philosophers are those who have been woken up to the strangeness, the astonishing fact of existence, and the burning desire to know where we come from and where we are going. Once this small spark lights a flame, philosophy can begin to consume us. Fully formed, it affects our whole life. It reorients us in a different direction. We must accommodate the search for wisdom into our hobbies, our careers, our relationships, our sleeping habits, our eating habits. Nothing is untouched. Philosophy has changed the way that I eat, my relationship to food. It's changed the way that I sleep, my relationship to the organic, the regular sort of bodily necessities of the day. And that is very, very practical and very encouraged. Elenchus, cooperative discussion leading to being puzzled and confused. Something that Socrates modeled for us and teaches us is that this active search, philosophy, takes the form of cooperative argumentation. We engage in dialogues, asking and answering questions that often expose contradictions in our thinking. Philosophical thinking is very much connected to rooting out our own contradictions, our own errors and biases, our own stubborn stupidity. This is sometimes just called the Socratic method, the elenchus. It's a Greek word. And it's demonstrated in Republic Book 1, as well as other early Platonic dialogues. So you're going to see Socrates expose contradictions in the thinking of Thrasymachus, Polemarchus, Cephalus, and eventually in Book 2 in Glaucon. You can see Sophie engaging in the elenchus with the philosopher letter writer. He asks her, "Who are you?" And as she thinks this through, she realizes she doesn't have a very good answer. So in that way, he cooperatively exposes errors in her own thinking, and that's a part of the philosophical journey. You should begin to ask yourself questions like this in this class. Now, at the same time, we have to clarify that elenchus is not strictly debate. It's cooperative argument. In the Meno, another book by Plato, Socrates paraphrases what debaters say. You have my answer. If I'm wrong, it's your business to take up the argument and refute me. That's not cooperative. That's combative. Friends, on the other hand, help each other. He continues, quote, But if we are friends and we were talking as you and I are now, I should reply in a milder strain and more in the dialectician's vein, more on the word dialectic later. That is to say, I should not only speak the truth, but I should make use of premises which the person interrogated would be willing to admit. And in this way, I shall endeavor to approach you. So the goal of Elenchus is not to refute your friends and embarrass them, but to help each other define the truth, to take premises that the other person would agree to. We should be as happy to find out we were wrong, for now we can change, as we would be happy to prove a friend wrong. Take that love of victory and apply it to yourself. We should not rejoice in victory, but in truth. The collaborative nature of philosophical thinking is part of why Socrates calls himself a midwife. This is an interesting title that he takes. He's not putting the ideas in your head. He's allowing you to deliver the ideas that you have. He's helping friends, and for us readers, even though it's many, many years later, he's helping us to give birth to the ideas that are already in our heads. Okay, buckle up, because this is where we get into the history of philosophy here, some vocab that you're going to need to know for this class and for your life. As the philosophical conversation between people develops, as the philosophical conversation between people develops, certain questions take shape. Socrates and his many friends, but especially Plato, clarified certain strands of philosophy as universal. So these are philosophical thinking across time. These questions define a limited menu of available answers to those universal questions. So it's not anything goes. Sometimes the answers are not obvious, but we can narrow it down to 2 or 3 really solid answers that are defensible, and we can refute a dozen other answers that are empty or weak or lame. For example, what is real? This is a question philosophers ask themselves and ask us, and you should ask yourself. Sophie finds out she doesn't know very much about what is real. But not knowing much right now doesn't mean the search ends there, and we certainly should not jump to the conclusion that, oh, nobody knows. That's the lazy way out. If nobody knows and there's no point in me asking, then I can give up now. What is really real is a pretty big question, but it's not unlimited and infinite. Sorry for the quick cut location change there. Um, so there are a few recurring answers on the limited menu of good answers. There's more answers than these, but these are some of the most recurring and the most well thought through and well defended answers that you can find anywhere in the world or any time in history where thoughtful people are trying to address the question of what is really real. Probably what is most real is either A, God, the divine, B, the human consciousness or soul, we ourselves are the most real, or C, the physical universe, the cosmos, the material world, including math and matter, or D, other. There are other answers. We're not going to go into all of these. I'm just showing you that that there's a limited number of really big, thoughtful answers, and we have to sort of maybe start with those before we decide, you know what, I don't know, we have to give up, there are no answers, or that my own personal opinion, having thought about it for 35 seconds, matters, right? I want my opinion to be built on the best possible answers that have ever been come up with by people smarter than myself. We can at least start by standing on their shoulders. Philosophers from all places and times have come to one of these 3 or 4 answers. So one way for you to get to your answer, what you believe, your worldview or your philosophy or just your opinions about things, is to take this very big question, learn as much as you can about each of these 3 answers. What does it mean for God or the divine to be the most real? What does it mean for the human soul to be the most real? And what does it mean for matter, sort of mindless matter in motion, to be the most real? Be able to provide detail about the pros and cons of each of these answers, evaluate, compare them, and find out which one that you conclude is true. So that's metaphysics, okay? Even though, that's reality. We're going to get to metaphysics next. Even though the world is one big whole, there are branches or divisions. Natural science, the knowledge of nature, is divided into branches such as geology and biology. Each branch of knowledge represents a branch or distinct area of the natural world. Geology studies rocks, generally speaking. Biology studies animals. Likewise, knowledge as a whole investigates the world as a whole, but it can be divided into branches even broader than those of natural science. Some of the oldest classifications are metaphysics, ethics, logic, and a few others. So let's talk about the big ones here, because although Plato doesn't use the word metaphysics, he's going to do a lot of metaphysics, and I want you to know kind of what conversation you're getting into. Metaphysics is our name for a branch of philosophy, or one piece of knowledge. All the core branches of philosophy originated in the pre-Socratic philosophers who lived before Socrates in about 300 or 400 BC. And these branches were clarified and often named explicitly by Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle famously invented the word metaphysics. As well as the thinkers after them that are in dialogue with them, there are non-Western philosophies in India, for example, but they used a kind of a different vocabulary set than what became popular in Western philosophy. So what is metaphysics? Metaphysics is the study of the ultimate nature of reality, that question of God, the mind, and the world. Reality, existence, and being. Sophie is starting to do metaphysics, to do metaphysical inquiry. She's starting to become a metaphysician when she asks the question, where does the world come from? What causes the world? And what causes that cause, if anything? Metaphysicians ask, what is real and what's it like? If you've got a piece of plastic here, plastic certainly seems real. It's tactile, takes up space in the world. It's there even if I'm not looking at it, even if I'm not thinking about it. It seems to be mind independent. And what's it like? It's hard. It is a little bit pliable. I can squeeze it. So it's not as hard as wood, for example, but it's a lot harder than feathers. Plastic can be melted. When you freeze it, not a whole lot happens. When you heat it up, it does melt. If you set it aside for 1,000 years, it probably won't biodegrade that much. So we're investigating the properties of things. What about a consciousness? What's that like? It's not hard or soft. It doesn't seem to have a material nature to it at all. And yet, consciousness does things that plastic doesn't do. Consciousness moves around in the form of attention or concentration or awareness. So what is that like? These are metaphysical questions. Because you are part of the world, asking, who am I, is a metaphysical question. I know that I am a note in the symphony of reality. And so investigating myself is investigating a piece of reality. Even asking that very personal question, who am I, is a metaphysical question. So metaphysics studies traditionally things like the following. What is the soul and its relationship to the body? The word psychology, which was coined in, I believe, the 1800s, comes from psyche, which means soul, and ology, which means the study of, right? The study of the soul. Metaphysics studies causes. What are things that make other things happen? When I say that the ice causes my coffee to be cold, I'm not just talking about ice and coffee. I'm talking about a thing that binds them together, a thing that connects them, a relationship between them that is causation. And that's a very interesting topic. Categories, what kinds of things are there? So if you look at 1,000 things in a field, you could say, well, there's 1,000 things. But if you notice that all of them are examples of the same type of flower, You could say, well, there's really only one thing in that field, and that is a wildflower with a bunch of different instances. Um, Properties is a metaphysical question. What are things like? Redness, brownness, the nature of being a dog, squareness, goodness, justice. Um, these are properties that some things have and some things don't have. An act that lacks the property of justice might be considered a criminal act. So it's very important to know what justice is and what kinds of things have that property. Metaphysics studies the ultimate reality. Is there a God? And if so, what is he like or they? And metaphysics studies things that do not change. So a lot of things when we observe the natural world are in flux or in change, but there also seem to be things that hold still, that persist through change. And metaphysics is very interested in those. These studies might sound pretty intimidating because we haven't really started on any of them. We're just sort of laying the groundwork here, right? But we can start somewhere simple, a wax taper or an old car. Imagine an old rusty car has been sitting in your neighbor's driveway for 30 years. It's the same darn car they parked there when it became inoperable back in 1995. However, the car has changed. The color went from a vibrant blue to a dingy brown. The metal became rusted. The windows have broken. Some of the seats have been removed. Maybe they took the gold out of the catalytic converter, right? The metal became rusted. The windows have broken. Some of the seats were removed. Maybe they took the metal out of the catalytic converter. So the metaphysical question about this car is what caused the car to change? What causes it to be the same thing that it was before, the exact same car that it was before? Common sense recognizes that it is the same car. If it moved, you would have noticed. But also common sense recognizes that it has a lot of different properties. Some are so significant that we might question whether it's the same car at all. Metaphysics tries to give a clear, thorough answer about how this happens. Here's another typo. Socrates investigated these questions. Socrates investigated these questions and discovered that he, like Sophie, didn't know what he thought he knew. In Plato's other dialogue, the Phaedo, Socrates says he realized that his understanding of causation was wrong. Becoming confused and waking up compelled him to look for deeper answers. That led him to the forms. The forms, which are now sometimes called universals in philosophy, are Plato's answer to the what is really real question. So this is under metaphysics, one of the, you could say, the other, what's really real, God, the soul, the world, forms. This is Plato's answer, the D, other answer. A form, simply put, or an eidos in Greek, is a property that all things of a certain type have in common. A dog, for example, would have dog nature or dogginess, okay, in common. But cats would not have the property of being dogs, since they do not participate in the form of dog. They do not exemplify dogginess. Okay, so exemplify is the verb we give when a form is exampled in something. It's exemplifying that form. Now, all dogs are animals, but not all animals are dogs. Dogs are a special class of animal that have a certain form in common. Plato noticed that what all dogs have in common is a form, a shape, or a look. They share a form that cats and cherry and mountains do not share. Now, the form of dog may seem a bit trivial. I'm just using that as an example. But what about the form of justice? Again, the form of justice would be what all just acts, just laws, just constitutions, just nations, just people, just nonprofits, just police departments, I think just lawyers have in common. The lack of that form of justice would make a person, place, or thing unjust. So now we're talking about something very important. Justice is what causes things to be just on Plato's view. Plato calls forms variously. He calls them the thing itself, for example, justice itself, or the just, or thingness, like redness or squareness. And in the Republic, we're going to see them look for the form of justice and look for, as well as the forms of other things in books 6 and 7. He observed that there are forms of mathematical objects like squares, triangles, odd and even, as well as forms of properties like redness or blueness, large and small. One of the examples I like to use if we were, if we had a whiteboard, is that you could picture three shapes, two squares and a triangle on a whiteboard. Okay, 1, 2, 3. You can mentally track that there are two shapes, square and triangle, on the whiteboard, but there's also three shapes, square, square, triangle. And the exercise is to, play this puzzle. How many shapes are there? 3 or 2? And some people say 3 because there's clearly 3 shapes. Some people say there's 2. There's a square, a triangle. And we go back and forth until our minds are forced to give a distinction between the form of a shape and the individual shapes, between the types of shape and the shapes themselves. Forms are thus universal because they can be in many different things. Once you understand that there's a form of square, then you can have 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000,000 individual squares. The form of dog is distinct from every individual dog that shares that form. The form of cookie, which is like the cookie cutter shape, right? That is one universal shape, is exemplified in 12 or 1,000 individual cookies. And we'll talk about forms quite a bit. It's one of the main themes of the Republic and one of the main themes of the Western philosophical tradition. Now let's switch to a different topic here of ethics. Ethics is one of the main divisions of philosophy, like metaphysics, and it's something that Socrates also practiced. He practiced an extremely noble form of life. He held himself to an extremely high standard. He was a political activist. He was a military participant. He fought in the Athenian army. He voted in the democracy. He held himself to high standards of friendship. He was an extremely welcoming and generous to educate his friends' children, and he was a gracious friend. He held himself to high standards of clarity of thought and moral principle, even allowing himself to be imprisoned and executed rather than renounce the search for wisdom that he felt was his mission given to him by God. And if man told him to stop, couldn't do it. Ethics is the philosophical way of thinking applied to the question of how we should live. We all know the basics of right and wrong. Don't steal, don't lie, don't murder, don't betray a friend. We all struggle with implementing basic morality. Try going 24 hours without gossiping, for example. Try going 24 hours without losing your temper at somebody, even in your mind being really critical and judgmental. It's very difficult. Being courageous all the time, very demanding. We may fail to have proper self-discipline, fail to be kind, fail to be patient, fail to be gentle, as we know and we admire people that are able to do this. We may fail to keep our promises. We may fail to judge character well and trust people who turn out to be scoundrels and hurt us. It's also a kind of an ethical failure, even though it's not my problem. I'm sort of making an error in judgment about someone else's character. We may fail to respect ourselves and put up with mistreatment far too long. All of these struggles are very common. In one sense, then, ethics is very simple. Follow your conscience without fail. Do what you already know you should do. Good luck. In another sense, ethics is a profound philosophical study. For what is the good? What do all good things have in common? What do we do with unclear edge cases? Is this actually stealing, right? Or is this actually lying? Is this actually murdering? If we knew the universal good, the form of goodness, if there is one, we'd have a much easier time doing the good individual acts that would make us good, or recognizing the good people and avoiding the scoundrels in life. We'll talk a lot about ethics in the Republic because Socrates and his friends are trying to be good. They're trying to build a just city. And really, they're trying to build a just city so they can see justice, so they can respond to Glaucon's concerns that maybe injustice is actually better, is actually more attractive. So that's a little bit about ethics. Another profound topic is epistemology. That's the last one we'll cover for this sort of introductory handout. How do we know what we know? Epistemology comes from the Greek word episteme. Let's assume that we all do know a little bit about a lot of things. How did we get even that much knowledge? How does an expert get a whole lot of knowledge about one particular subject? Let's also suppose that we don't know quite as much as we think we do. We can often be mistaken. We can often overshoot what we can justify. Epistemology is the discipline that studies these topics. We're doing philosophical reflection on knowledge itself. We're wondering what knowledge is, how much we can know, and where it all comes from. Different types of knowledge, different types of objects of knowledge. We all have opinions. We've all been taught things or come to believe things. But what makes an opinion true? I think everybody acknowledges that you can have false opinions. Given the choice, we prefer to have true beliefs over false ones, but how do we confirm when a belief is true? How do we prove it or substantiate it? And if we can't confirm a belief, should we hold it at all? Should we hold it loosely? Should we get rid of our unproven beliefs? Like how do we handle different levels of certainty? Complete skepticism is impossible. The idea that we don't know anything about anything ever, it's actually self-refuting, because if I know I don't know anything, then of course that's one item of knowledge. Putting all of this together, we can talk about the examined life. Sophie and Socrates both want us to examine our life. They want us to not go through life asleep, nestled comfortably in the fur of the rabbit. Sure, we might wake up physically, get dressed, eat, go to work, go to school, come home, watch a little something on our phone, and go to bed. But did we ever truly wake up at any point throughout that day? We were alive, we have a pulse, but did we really live? This, at its best, is what philosophy can do, is poke you, stir you, to wake up, to examine your life, and to seek something big. Let's talk about the opposite of philosophy, which is sophistry, or the counterfeit. Sophistry is the idea of seeming wisdom. The sophists of Socrates' day were of very uneven quality. Some were fairly clever teachers and inventors, but some were charlatans and cheats. They charged people for their supposed wisdom, like many do today, charge people for their courses, but they didn't know much about it. And they're dangerous because they give real philosophers a bad name. A sophist roughly means a wise guy. Socrates is very keen to distinguish the sophist, the fake wise, from the true philosopher, the real wise, or at least the wisdom seeker, because true philosophers are, in the Republic, worthy to lead the city and to seek justice and to kind of build something that is safe and strong for all of us to be a part of, a commonwealth. Well, sophists are just in it for themselves and ultimately lead those that trust them into ruin. Last section here, the death of Socrates. Socrates was ahead of his time. He didn't invent philosophy, but even he claims that he received it as a gift from heaven. And his philosophy is still fresh 2,400 years later. The Delphic oracle told him that he was wise, and he didn't believe him. He knew that he didn't have any wisdom. So he set out to prove the oracle wrong. Socrates' piety is to argue with God and to prove God wrong if you can. Thus, he turned his quest for wisdom into a kind of a divine mission. Like a true historical Prometheus, he brought the sacred fire of wisdom seeking from the gods to men. And yet, sometimes the gift of the gods is too good for men. Socrates was loved by many, but he was hated by a powerful few. He was tried and executed for, quote, corrupting the youth and innovating about religion, disbelieving the Greek gods. That's what they said, at least. Truly, perhaps the Athenian people could not handle philosophical thinking. They wanted to live unexamined lives. They wanted to stay asleep. They wanted to be nestled in the fur of the rabbit. And that's difficult with Socrates around. He was an alarm clock for a slumbering giant, and the giant crushed him. For us, as we're beginning our philosophical journey in this class, we will follow Socrates and his friends from a wonderful beginning, a beginning in wonder, to the search for the forms. Thanks for joining.